This week's Torah portion, Vayishlach, starts off with after Yaakov already finished working for Lavan for a good 7 years and ends up marrying Leah, then another 7 years and ends up marrying Rachel. Well, really, he married her before he started working the second set of 7 years. But a total of 20 years he ends up working for Lavan after Lavan cheats him a little bit at the end to keep him around a little bit longer. And what happens is it's now time for Yaakov to continue his journey, to go with his family back to his homeland, the promised land, the land of Israel. What happens is Yaakov on the way home decides it's time to reconcile with his brother Esau. So Yaakov, in understanding what he might be getting himself into, he decides to send some malachim, which can literally be translated as messengers. He sends them towards Esau to see what's happening with his brother Esau. And he's not sure how the showdown will go. Will he be greeted with open arms, or will Esau be armed to the teeth? And as the story has it, of course, Esau is armed to the teeth as these angels or messengers that Yaakov sends come back to report that Esau is armed with 400 men and he's ready for war. Now, ultimately, they reconcile, at least momentarily. But right away, Rashi, the French commentator, on the word Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, that Yaakov sends Malachim, which can be translated as angels or messengers. Rashi, quoting the Medrash, tells us that he sent Malachim Mamish, which means literally angels. Now, this in itself is questionable. Why would Yaakov have to send angels? Not just why would Yaakov have to send angels, how is Yaakov even allowed to send angels? We don't just use angels to do our bidding for us and to go on missions for us. And because of that, seemingly he should have been sending real messengers. Now, the ultimate purpose of Yaakov sending the angels was to neutralize Esau, to transform Esau actually, to show Esau that he was coming in goodwill in order to ultimately have the final showdown, or at least Yaakov was hoping for the final showdown between the two brothers, that they would no longer have to fight and that they would be able to reconcile their differences and come together to work together as brothers. And because of this, Yaakov understood that there needed to be some kind of spiritual journey or quest or transformation. And therefore he sent angels. But it wasn't just that. Yaakov knew that if Esau was armed to the teeth and not ready for this transformation, Esau would have shot the messenger. Esau would have taken care of these messengers if they were men of flesh and blood. And Yaakov, not wanting to put anybody in danger, understood he had to send angels. Now there's a fascinating interpretation on this Rashi from Rabbi Doobie, the Maggid of Mezrich, which we will explore who exactly the Maggid was momentarily. And the way it goes is as follows, that in the year 1772, the Maggid's last Shabbos in this world was actually 3 days later on Tuesday. The Maggid eventually returned his soul to his maker on the 19th day of the month of Kislev, which we will explore momentarily, gave a fascinating interpretation. And he reads, where he says that when Rashi says that Yaakov literally sent angels, he says it's more than that. Is that Yaakov sent the literal part of the angels. In other words, the word mamish, which means literally, also comes from the word mamoshis, which means the physicality. And that is that Yaakov only sent the physicality, so to say the body of the angels, but not the soul or the spirit of the angels in order to transform Esau. Now, This itself has to be understood. How is it possible that as a human beings, when it comes to physical entities, we understand how there is a makeup of a body and a soul? But how can you say the same thing regarding angels? We know that angels are spiritual beings. So how can we justify this concept of a body and a soul of an angel? How do you split the two? How do we even understand what a body and a soul of an angel is? And the truth is, besides for the body and the soul of everything that exists, being its physical makeup and its spiritual makeup, on a deeper level, the concept of a body and a soul is the body is the function that something has, be it a physical function or a spiritual function, versus the soul. The soul represents the core essence of what that item or that thing might be. So an angel can be sent on a mission to accomplish something for a particular task. However, the soul of the angel is its essence, its true life force. And that Yaakov didn't send. But based on this understanding, why would Yaakov not send the most powerful part of the angel for this ultimate transformation of his brother Esau? And we know it was a hard job. It was an extremely difficult task, and that's why it didn't even last this time, and that these two brothers would be at odds for the next few thousand years, for the next few millennium, till this very day. The brothers, Yaakov and Esau, the Jewish nation and Western society, are at odds in many ways, somewhat reconciling, but over the past few hundred years, a few thousand years, it was more suffering than reconciling. And if that's the case, why would Yaakov not send the soul of the angel along for the mission? Now, to appreciate this, let's go through just a little bit of a history of a holiday coming up at the end of this week, a Hasidic holiday that is on Friday and Shabbos, and that is the 19th day of the month of Kislev and the 20th day of the month of Kislev. So this history of this holiday goes back to, as I mentioned before, the year 1772, which in that year, the Maggid of Mizrich passed away on the 19th day of Kislev. And it is somewhat of a celebrated holiday, even though it is the passing of the Maggid. But the Maggid once referred to it as his auspicious day, his Yom Hilula, which literally translates as a wedding. That's actually how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, referred to his own day of passing. Now, who was the Maggid of Mizrich? So the Maggid of Mizrich was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Chassidic movement in the year 1734. After founding the Chassidic movement, eventually the Maggid, Rabbi Doobie of Mizrich, who at first was a little bit reluctant. He wasn't so sure about this Hasidic movement. But finally, in the year 1752, he met the Baal Shem Tov. And after discussing many different areas of Jewish academia, Jewish law, because the Maggid himself, he was known as the Maggid because he was somewhat of a preacher. He was a person who would go around telling stories. He was an extremely scholarly individual. And he questioned what this Hasidic movement had to bring to the table. What was wrong with Judaism until now? After discussing many different concepts of the Baal Shem Tov, he appreciated the Baal Shem Tov's ability to understand and to learn. But for this, he could not justify the Hasidic movement. And because of this, he was going to leave the Baal Shem Tov, not having anything to do with the Hasidic movement. Until the Baal Shem Tov asked him a question in a book compilation called the Eitz Chaim. It's a work on Kabbalah. And the Maggid gave his interpretation. The Baal Shem Tov questioned it. The Maggid was not satisfied with the question and stuck with his answer and said, "I'm sure my answer is right." To which the Baal Shem Tov replied, "Your answer is correct, but you lack soul in your learning." And this piqued the Maggid's interest. This was something the Maggid was not aware of, wasn't a term that he was accustomed to using. And he decided he would become a disciple, a student of the Baal Shem Tov, the greatest student of that. In the year 1760, on Shavuos, the Baal Shem Tov passed away. The Baal Shem Tov's son, Rabbi Tzvi, took over the leadership of the Chassidic movement, and on the first yard site of the Baal Shem Tov in the year 1761, Rabbi Tzvi announced that his father came to him in a dream and said it is time for Rabbi Dover, the Maggid of Mezrich, to take over the leadership of the Chassidic movement. Just one of my favorite stories in the Maggid is, like I said, he would travel from town to town. And even when he lived in his own town in Mezrich, he was a very simple person. He didn't live with luxuries. He lived a very simple life, a very simple lifestyle. There was once a very rich man who came to him to discuss a few questions he had. He was looking for guidance. While sitting in the Maggid's house, he turns to the Maggid and he looks around and he sees no furniture. He sees how the Maggid lives such a simple lifestyle. And he said, "Where's your fancy couches, your leather couches, your fancy furniture? What kind of house is this? What kind of setup do you have in life?" Which the Maggid responded, "And where's your furniture? Where's your fancy belongings?" So the man laughed and said, "Rabbi, I'm traveling. At home, you should see how my mansion is furnished." So the Maggid smiled and he says, "I have the same exact situation. I am here. I am just passing through. I am just traveling through this life. At home, my true home, where the soul belongs. Over there, I have a beautiful furnishing." Now, as I said before, the Maggid passes away in the year 1772, so he led the Hasidic movement for roughly 11 years. One of the Maggid's greatest students was Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, otherwise known as, by his colleagues, as the Litvak. He wrote the seminal work of Chassidus called, at least Chabad Chassidus, called the Tanya. Now, the Tanya was first, so let's fast forward. After the Maggid passes away, it was extremely rough in the Chassidic community. There were many great students, and each one went back to their own city, their own place where they came from. And that's when the Chassidic movement starts to break down into many different Chassidic sects. The Alter Rebbe continues his understanding of the Maggid's and the Baal Shem Tov's teachings, and he founds Chassidic Chabad. In the year 1796, the Tanya is printed for the first time. The Alter Rebbe spent years putting the Tanya together. There are certain areas in the Tanya of the Alter Rebbe literally spent weeks deciding whether to add or to take away one letter. Finally, in 1796, it goes to print. In the year 1798, after Sukkot, the Alter Rebbe is arrested, and the Alter Rebbe spends 53 days in prison. He was arrested because of slanderous accusations, unfortunately, which came from other Jews who didn't agree with the Chassidic movement, who opposed it staunchly. And finally, after 53 days in the Tsar's prison, they understood that the Alter Rebbe was a holy person, a very special person, and the Alter Rebbe was released. So 26 years after the Maggid passes away, another occasion takes place on the 19th day of Kislev and the 20th day, and that is when the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. Now, a short while before the Maggid in Mezrich passed away, he told the Alter Rebbe, and he said, "You should know that the 19th day of Kislev is a very special day for you and for me. It is our Yom HaHilula." The Alter Rebbe would not know what that meant for 26 years until he was released from prison on the day of his teacher's passing. Based on this, let's understand something. Why was the Alter Rebbe imprisoned in the first place? And that is, it wasn't just because of this slander from the opposition. It was actually a court case in heaven. You see, we'll get to that in a moment. So we have over here an account, which is the Alter Rebbe was quoted that while he was sitting in prison, in the Tsar's prison, he had many different visitors. And there are many fascinating stories that took place while the Alter Rebbe was sitting in prison. Hopefully, over the weekend, there will be some gatherings, Zoom gatherings, hopefully, where we will be able to explore the great holiday of Yud Kislev on its own. Tonight, we will get a short glimpse into it. So Alter Rebbe, while sitting in prison, he was visited by his teacher, the Maggid Mizrich, and the Baal Shem Tov. Obviously, a miraculous visit, as they had both already passed away. And he asked them, "Why am I here?" And their answer to him was, obviously, it had nothing, or at least on a true level, it was not due to the slanderous accusations. It was because in heaven, there were accusations against the Alter Rebbe for spreading the teachings of Hasidus. In other words, the opposition was not coming from this physical world. This physical world was only playing out what was happening in heaven. And there was opposition against the spread of Hasidus. To which the Alter Rebbe responded, "So if I make it out of here, should I stop?" And they responded, "Because you have started. When you will make it out, you will continue in an even greater fashion than you did until now." Now we must understand, what was wrong with the Alter Rebbe's teaching of Hasidus? What could have been the opposition? Isn't it just another aspect of the Torah? And if that's the case, what could be the opposition to it? So in order to understand this and to appreciate this, we have to look at what is Hasidus. So Hasidus is ultimately the soul of the Torah. You see, just like we have a body and a soul, the body, our physical makeup, the soul, the life force behind our physical makeup, what makes us tick, what gives us drive, what makes us feel alive. That is what Hasidus is to the Torah. It is the soul of the written Torah, of the oral Torah. It is what's behind everything in the Torah. It's behind every law, every story, every analogy, every bit of Jewish history. There's the soul behind it. Now, what was the opposition to it? So for this, we have the Rambam tells us, already in the times of the Talmud, they established that the secrets of the Torah, the soul of the Torah, should not be explored publicly, should not be something made available to the masses, because it will be corrupted and therefore must be kept a secret. Now, if that's the case, what happened all of a sudden that if it was not supposed to be widespread, and as we've seen, the Rambam brings it based on a Gemara, that such parts of the Torah are meant to remain private and secret, that only the greatest of sages would be able to touch it. If that's the case, how come all of a sudden in the late 1700s, was this the time for the Torah to be spread and the well springs of Hasidus to come forth? And for this, we have two approaches, or at least two aspects, I should say. And that is, on the one hand, there was a famous parable given that there was once this prince who fell very sick, deathly ill. And all the king's doctors came to check out the prince, and they couldn't come up with any medication or any solution for this child. So finally, one doctor said, "I know the sickness, and the only way to heal this child is with taking a particular precious gem, grinding it into a powder, mixing that powder with water." And the prince was so sick that the prince couldn't open his mouth, that luckily, if even one drop of this mixture will go into the prince's mouth, it'll be an elixir of life. It'll bring the child back to life and heal them. Now, this precious gem, there was only one in the kingdom, and that was sitting in the centerpiece of the king's royal crown. And as you can understand, the king, loving his son, the prince, immediately commanded his servants to bring the crown, grind up the gem, and even if just one drop of this mixture will go into the prince's mouth, it was worth it. And this was the parable given to what Chassidus is. You see, if you look at our history, what the Jewish nation was going through towards the late 1700s was unfathomable. The amount of terror and destruction the Jewish nation went through while being exiled, ever since the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, where we were chased from one country to the next, being expelled by one leadership after another, being chased with pogroms, one nation after another, whether it was the Almohads, it was the Christians in one country or another, it was the Spanish Inquisition, or the Eastern Europeans who loved killing Jews. The Jewish nation was extremely downtrodden. They had nothing left. Not only that, this also came in the wake of the false Messiah with the Shabtai Tzvi, who eventually converted to Islam. And you can understand the horror and the terror that the Jewish nation was going through then. But as if that wasn't bad enough, within the Jewish nation itself, there was a huge split between the learned and the simple. Because as you can understand, a majority of the nation was not learned. They didn't have the time to study. They didn't have the time to learn. They were being persecuted. And a huge split grew within the community. And it was at this point that Chassidus needed to come to breathe life back into Judaism. A Judaism which was once vibrant, but at this point, at best, people were keeping Judaism by rote, robotically, with absolutely no meaning to it, no love and fervor, no connection with God for their Judaism. And that's when Chassidus comes to the scene. It says it's time to breathe life back into Judaism, to bring that passion, that connection with God back into our day-to-day lives with Judaism through the Torah by revealing its soul. Another aspect of why Chassidus came when it did and its purpose is that we know that the entire idea of Mashiach is that the world will be so perfect that all we will want to do is get to know God, to understand God, to be connected with God. And Chassidus gives us a glimpse and an insight to what that world looks like. Because as we come closer to the time of Mashiach, the time of the ultimate redemption, we start to get a little bit of a glimpse or a taste. And that's when Chassidus came to the scene to give us that. Yeah. Based on this idea, we can appreciate what was taking place over here. The Alter Rebbe was now sitting in prison because in heaven, the courts had to rule whether it was actually time for Chassidus to be spread or not. However, interestingly enough, the Alter Rebbe didn't start the Chassidic movement. Like we said, that the Baal Shem Tov started it already in the 1730s. And if that's the case, why was the Alter Rebbe sitting in prison? And the idea is that we know that the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, in their style of Chassidus, was almost like inspirational nuggets. It was just the taste of Chassidus, to a certain extent, underdeveloped to the minds of the masses, underdeveloped to a regular person being able to tap into its true power. The Alter Rebbe, on the other hand, his style was to bring it down that even the simplest of people who just have a brain to understand can appreciate the depths and the well springs of Chassidus. And this is what was being challenged. And ultimately, the Alter Rebbe is set free on the 19th of Kislev because the heavenly court rules. Yes, it is time for it to spread. And we can look back at the Renaissance that this caused within the world, overall, the Jewish world, the spreading of Chassidus till this very day and its victory. Yeah. Based on this idea, we can start to appreciate the concept of Yaakov sending angels to Esau. See, Yaakov and Esau represent the two brothers that will forever be fighting, representing the body and the soul conflict, representing our animalistic tendencies and our selfish self versus our altruistic self and our godly self, the part of ourselves that is self-transcendent. And this is what Yaakov was trying to reconcile. Yaakov representing the soul, Esau representing the body. Yaakov representing the godly soul, Esau representing the animalistic soul. You see, when it comes to the general, bigger picture, our entire purpose of being down here in this physical world is ultimately to transform the world around us, but that all starts with transforming ourselves. And in order to do that, something has to happen. We have to send angels. We have to use angels. What are angels? So most of you are thinking, what do you mean? Your average person doesn't have angels at their disposal the way Yaakov did. And the fact is that's true. Even though through every good deed and action we do, every good word that we say, every time we pray, we create angels, but we don't have a command on angels the way Yaakov did. And not necessarily are we supposed to. So what is this idea of sending angels and using angels at our command? So the Rambam, Maimonides, in his book, The Guide for the Perplexed, explains that the concept of angels can be understood as the human faculties of intellect and emotions. And the concept here is that a person has to be able to reach deep, dig deep within themselves, to get in touch with their own soul, their own neshama, their godly soul, and how their godly soul manifests itself in their own intellect and emotions. And when a person starts to do that, a person arouses within themselves their own so-called angels, because angels are these faculties within us, in order to use them to transform ourselves, that is our animalistic selves and our animalistic instincts. And by transforming ourselves, we are able to start transforming the world around us. What does this mean? You see, there are two ways that the godly soul can communicate with the animal soul or our bodies. And like this, ultimately, the Torah is a guide for how we should live our lives. So the Torah has 613 rules. So one way the godly soul can interact to bring this out is by, so to say, forcing us into it. Our godly soul can schlep us to shul. Our godly soul can schlep us to light Shabbos candles. Our godly soul can schlep us to make a kiddush. Our godly soul ultimately gets us to do these physical acts of mitzvahs and not to do the wrong thing, but ultimately is at odds with who we are or who we feel that we are, and becomes like this external voice that sometimes influences me to do the right thing. You see, that's what happens when we look at Torah and we look at Judaism and the mitzvahs based on their body and their externalities. Yeah, this is a nice guide to life that if I can force myself to go along with it, I will. However, when we can tap into our soul and we can tap into the soul of what Judaism is about, it's not that we are at odds with Torah and we force ourselves to do the mitzvahs and to go along with it, but that we can actually be transformed, that we become one with our soul, become one with our Judaism, and that these are not an external influence to how we live our lives, but rather a seamless fusion of how we live our lives, because this is actually who we are, not what we do. Many times people confuse the two. And this is the concept of what Yutis Kislev brought about, is this ability to dig deep within the Torah, to discover the soul behind the Torah, at the same time discovering the soul within ourselves and revealing it, to be able to bring Judaism into our lives in such a way where it's so integrated and so naturally part of our lives that it's not two forces working against each other, but when we can uncover the true oneness and fusion that exists within us, that our soul is who we are, and that we're living the ways of the Torah is our most natural form of life. All of a sudden, we're not being schlepped to shul. We're not being schlepped to put on tefillin or to do the mitzvahs. But this is the natural way of life. Now, based on this, we can understand the value of why Yaakov had to send the body of the angels and not the souls of the angels. Not the way we originally understood it, that Yaakov, so to say, held back their souls, which is the power that drives whatever these angels are. And in this case, it's ourselves, our intellect, our intellectual and emotional capabilities, capacities. But rather the soul went, but the soul was always tapped into where it was coming from and what its purpose would be. The advantage of that is that as soon as we send our emotions and our intellect into a situation, be it in self-transformation or into transforming the world around us, the intellect and emotion can get lost and can become a product of its surrounding, a product of society, or a product of whatever situation a person is going through. And then we fall victim to the situation, otherwise known as victimhood. And the idea is that no, who we are always has to be tethered to our soul. And like that, our intellect and our emotions, even if they may face opposition, do not become defined by the opposition they face. And on the contrary, will be able to contribute as ambassadors of light, as ambassadors of the divine in the situation that they find themselves in. And like that, they were able to impact the Esav, be it the Esav within us or the Esav in the world, because they were always tapped into their source, never losing focus of what their ultimate goal was. And that's what ensured that they would be successful, not being affected by their surroundings, and to actually transform wherever these angels were sent. Yaakov was setting us up to be able to accomplish that. The Alter Rebbe and the Maggid gave us these tools and this mission statement that this is what we are here to do and accomplish. So in summary, here's how our day usually goes. We wake up in the morning. We have to have a coffee. We eat breakfast. We read the news. We get involved with business. Life happens. And it's a huge mess. It's a chaotic life. There's so much fragmentation out there. And not fragmentation necessarily because of negativity, but just because there's so much going on. And how do we find meaning in all of this mess? So you have some people who just get caught up in what they do. And such people, you meet them, and they have nothing to them except for what they do. You meet a person, you say, hi, I'm Dove. Who are you? He says, oh, hi, I'm a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. A lawyer is what you do. You practice law. Who are you behind what you do? But most people get lost beyond that, because when you try to find meaning in it and meaning to the chaos and the fragmentation out there, it gets extremely daunting. So we end up just giving into whatever is around us and distracting us, and that becomes who we are. The Jew is tasked with the mission: never become what you do, and always recognize that the reason why we're out there in the first place is not just to make another buck, not just to make another business deal, but for the ultimate meaning and purpose behind it, to make the world a better place, to make the world a more godly place. And in order to do that, we have to constantly recognize that the angels that we send out, the energies that we invest, and the way we put ourselves out there have to always be tethered to Yaakov, always have to be tethered to our core soul and identity of who we are as messengers of God in this world. And like that, we will ultimately be successful.